The largest study on culture was done by a Dutch anthropologist called Gert Hofstede in the late 60s, early 70s, and he defined culture as the collective programming of the mind. I look at culture as being the lens through which we look out at the world. So in other words, we carry our culture with us, regardless. It's like an invisible backpack. You may not see your culture when you are in your own culture because culture is tacit. So it's like a fish in water. A fish doesn't know it's in water until you take it out. So most times we don't even think about our culture until we are out of our own culture. Why is culture important? Culture is important because it shapes your psychological thinking. And that influences how we behave. So if you think that most behavior, people behave in ways that's consistent to the way they think, and culture shapes that. So how do we actually understand this? Let's deconstruct this a little. So if you think of look at the bottom end of the triangle, there's something like 7 billion people on the planet. All human beings, we share certain commonalities. Obviously, we eat, we sleep, we have shelter, we wear clothes, we have families. And of course, the difference is becoming, in certain cultural contexts, some food that's delicious in one culture may not be valued or appreciated as much in a different culture. So when we talk about culture, which is the middle triangle, culture is learned. You learn your culture. And you learn it from your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, your upbringing, etc. So let me give you an example of learned culture. So I am born and brought up in Malaysia, of Indian heritage. I came out to Australia as a student many, many, many years ago. My wife is English. So on one of our first trips back to Malaysia to visit my parents, my wife said to me, well, as an Indian, we eat food with our hands. So my wife said to me, well, when we go back to your parents' house, I'm going to eat food with my hands, with my fingers, to demonstrate cultural sensitivity. And I said, well, that's a good idea. 5 minutes into the meal, my wife turns around to me and says, Tom. I said, what? She said, how do you stop the curry and the yogurt from running down your hands? To which I replied, actually, I don't know. Wasn't happening to me. Wasn't happening to anybody else at the table. But until she asked me the question, I had never actually thought about it. And of course, I knew how to do it because I'd learned it as a child. And I've since obviously read up about, there's a whole art and science to how to eat your food with your fingers, right? How to mix the curry, how to mix the yogurt, etc. So, look, we learn things like how to eat our food in our culture. It may be even things like how to use a knife and a fork. That's just one aspect of culture, one thing that we learn in our culture. What other things do we learn in our culture? Well, we learn things like how to deal with members of the opposite gender. We learn things like how to deal with conflict, how to deal with hierarchy. What are the things that constitutes good teamwork? What constitutes good leadership? We learn these things in a culture, and we learn this from our environment. And the people who are teaching us this teach this because they want us to fit in. Of course, to say everybody in the culture is the same is a myth. There are subcultures within cultures. I mean, if you look at Australia, Melbourne is different to Sydney. And those of you who are from Melbourne, within Melbourne there are subcultures, depending on where you live. So there are always subcultures. It's only you'll be able to recognize the subcultures depending on how well you know them. So everyone, at the same time, is an individual. 7 billion people on the planet, no one has the same fingerprints as you. So you're unique. No one has had the same experience, the same background, the same perspective as you right now at this moment. So culture is a general kind of thing that we kind of think about in terms of understanding, well, how do we kind of look at some of the core values where that person may be coming from? But you always need to check that assumption, because today, just because someone is from a different part of the country, you may be dealing with somebody in China and they may look Chinese, but they studied in the US, they worked in the UK, and they're married to someone from Spain. Okay, and that is happening more and more today. So therefore, it's kind of really understanding that. Now, the importance of actually understanding our own culture is that when we look at behaviors of a different culture, we view it through our own cultural values, our norms, our biases, because we interpret behavior in a different culture based on our own understanding of it. And unless we understand the values that the other behavior is from, we may actually mistake that behavior. And therefore, that can obviously lead to issues or problems.